arrive early at the lawyer's office, but when my lawyer and I got there, Dave and his lawyer were already in the conference room. Seeing him with an attractive woman triggered my usual jealous reaction, making me feel somewhat inferior to him deep down. At 48, he was more handsome than at 20, tall and muscular, owning a successful business and leading the local chamber of commerce. I shuddered at the thought that if today didn't go well, I might never feel his comforting arms again. Dave barely acknowledged me as I followed my lawyer into the room. My face turned pale when the red-haired lawyer reached out to reassure him. I interpreted it as her wanting to quickly finish the meeting to pursue him. I knew from experience that she would enjoy it, as my husband was skilled and knew how to use his charm. Dave smiled at her but remained neutral when he looked at me. Frustrated by Dave's determination not to talk to me, I was forced to attend the meeting. While my lawyer chatted with the red-haired lawyer, I sat down. Dave took a folder from my large purse, opened it, and laid out the finished 2-page script. Seeing Dave smile faintly, I knew he was aware of my thorough preparation. He set up a laptop, plugged in speakers, and put a single sheet of paper next to it. Then, casually, he put his hands on the table and looked at me with a polite but insensitive face. No anger, no hate, no grief. I had prepared for this meeting for 3 days, knowing my script by heart. I used my knowledge of David Brown to appeal to his emotions. We gathered to discuss Mrs. Julianne Brown, agreeing to sign a divorce petition if Dave listened to her for at least 1 hour. "If everyone is ready, I suggest the hour begins now," she said, turning the timer knob. It began to tick loudly, emphasizing the silence in the room. I was annoyed that Dave insisted on having lawyers present instead of a private meeting. I planned to share my feelings for the next 45 minutes before making Dave admit to something justifying my inappropriate behavior. It's awkward with just the two of us, even more humiliating in front of strangers. Well, no point in dwelling on the negatives. I had no choice. Glancing at my unnecessary notes, I crossed my fingers. Remembering my friend Sonia's advice, I cleared my throat. I expressed gratitude for Dave's willingness to meet with me today. I acknowledged my error and clarified that it wasn't related to his failure, but rather my own self-centeredness. I had spent days reflecting on this, hoping that Dave would appreciate my honesty. I believed he desired to forgive me, and my speech aimed to offer the justification he needed. Contemplating what might happen if the kids were at home, I considered playing the "Dave, you can't break up the family" card, confident it would succeed. Observing his reaction to my speech, I examined his face and was taken aback by his response. In the ensuing silence, Dave's expression remained neutral. He didn't even direct his gaze toward me. Methodically, he raised his pen and marked a check next to the first sentence in his notes. My first words almost completely confused me. I said exactly what he expected, shaking my confidence. In my arrogance, I forgot that not only had I come up with my argument based on 30 years of knowing him, but he had spent those 30 years looking back at me. I'm not ashamed to admit I was shocked. I emphasized the importance of sticking to the script, reiterating that the situation with Dave was a result of my own foolish and self-centered decisions. I conveyed the feelings of being lost, without children, feeling aged, unattractive, and worthless. I explained that I met Jason while collaborating on a church committee, describing him as sophisticated and a skilled seducer who knew precisely which buttons to press and when. He began acting like a friend, listening to my problems after church meetings last year when you were frequently away. But one day, after a church meeting, Jason suggested going to a cafe, and unfortunately, I agreed. It all seemed innocent, and he appeared as a good friend, so I didn't realize he was adept at breaking through a woman's defenses. Well, from coffee shops, we progressed to restaurants where he complained about his wife. I know it's a cliché, but by then, I trusted him. The restaurants became increasingly upscale, and the gifts he gave me became more enjoyable. Oh, Dave, you can't imagine how nice it is when a guy 15 years younger than you tries to win you over. But you'd be proud because 4 months ago, he asked me to sleep with him, and I declined. I should have refused to meet him after that when his intentions were clear, but by then, I had become somewhat reliant on the effect his compliments and attention had on my ego and confidence. I fell silent and sniffled, wiping my eyes with the finger I had previously rubbed on an onion piece in my pocket. It stung so much that I didn't dare rub my other eye. One teary eye should have been enough. I stopped, started again, faltered, and hesitated. Oh, honey, I'm so ashamed that I didn't break up with him. He took me to a restaurant and bought a $300 bottle of Grange, even though he himself doesn't drink wine. Instead of wasting it, I drank almost all of it. I'm pretty sure that's what he wanted. I was too nervous to resist him. When we left the restaurant, he offered to take me home, and I foolishly agreed. Once in the driveway, he leaned over and kissed me, but I was too drunk to stop him. You know how I get after a couple of glasses of wine. Then he started touching my chest. At this point, my logic was completely broken, and I remember just thinking that I should move him out of the driveway so the neighbors wouldn't see us. For the same reason, I opened the garage door and forced him to park inside. I cheated a little by admitting that even in the car, I thought Jason might be staying a while. And I certainly didn't want the neighbors to see a strange car in the driveway the next morning. But it was all a calculated risk on my part. I knew enough about men in general to understand that being betrayed was a major blow to a man's ego, and I wanted Dave to ensure that no one else ever found out about it. Well, except for 2 lawyers. Well, Jason got out of the car as the garage door was closing and started kissing me again. As I said, I had already drunk most of the bottle of Grange and was ripe for plucking. He grabbed my key and led me inside. I took him to one of the spare bedrooms, and I will be ashamed of this until the day I die. I let him do whatever he wanted with me. I'm so sorry, Dave. My only saving grace was that I was composed enough with him to get him to put on a safe. After Jason came, I think we both fell asleep. I because I was drunk, and he because he must have been tired after a 4 or 5 month chase. I know for sure I wouldn't have done it if I wasn't drunk and depressed when I woke up, and I definitely would have kicked him to the curb immediately. Instead, you entered the room and turned on the light. I have never been so ashamed in my life. The look of pain on your face just killed me. I realized how much misuse I caused to you and us with one simple mistake. With tears still flowing from one eye, I turned my pleading gaze to my husband. Having spent a lifetime together, I knew that I could read his expression like an open book and be able to judge how my request was going. Not true. His expression remained neutral. In fact, he didn't even look at me. Strange, but he was fiddling with the laptop in front of him. I thought he was writing notes until he clicked the link on his screen. A voice came from the speakers. My voice. Ugh, don't kiss me. You reek of beer. What about you, rotten grape breath? What? I had one lousy glass of white. The audio clip stopped and the room fell into a thunderous silence. I think that's how it was. The roaring sound in my head drowned out everything else. Yes, I felt embarrassed and humiliated when Dave walked in on me that night with Jason before lifting Jason by his hair and beating the crap out of his body. But that was insignificant compared to the fact that I had just been caught in a huge lie. This completely threw me off track. I was so confident that my script would work, my eyes darted around the room. Dave's lawyer smiled slightly. Mine looked slightly embarrassed. Dave just looked at me expectantly with that damn blank expression. Later. I will never understand why I didn't immediately realize what it all meant. What the heck? Dave had an audio recording of my meeting with Jason that night being wound up. It never occurred to me to follow the logic of this. Why does he need a voice recorder there if he didn't know in advance that he could record something? What else did we say? The silence stretched uncomfortably for a long time, and I looked at the cryptic shorthand of my notes and, looking back stupidly, plunged into the script I had prepared. I clung to him like a drowning man clings to debris. It was only once. It won't happen again. Nothing like that. Please believe me. I just wasn't strong enough to resist him, but I wasn't so out of control that I wouldn't force him to use a protection or let him take me on our bed. He wanted it, but I would never do that, no matter how drunk I was. We were in Megan's old room, right? Dave just looked at me sadly, and I didn't know what was worse, his sad face or his impassive one. He shook his head and turned to the computer. I felt, rather than heard him double-click the icon, and I cringed until I just like to watch how you lie in front of me, full of desire. It is very hot. Then, once it's finished, another double-click, and Jason's voice again. When can we have time in bed again in your clueless husband's bed? It was so cool. This time, Dave clicked and ended the clip, and then just looked at me silently, accusatory. What could I even say? Everything I claimed was debunked, not by Dave, but by my own words. Protection. It was a one-time drunken mistake, not getting closeness with my husband in our own bed. The whole thing crumbled as a lie in just 30 words. Stand, stand. I'm speechless. Though it was awkward, I looked at Dave for any clue. His neutral gaze revealed nothing. I noticed my lawyer checking her watch, making me focus on the ticking timer, realizing the 60 minutes I had to salvage my marriage were slipping away, and I admit, going terribly. I forced myself to suppress panic. Apologies for the lie, Dave, about it being the first time. I just didn't want to hurt you more than I already had. I thought if I could convince you it was a one-time thing, and for the exact reason I stated, you wouldn't be so offended. I stumbled back into silence. Should I now admit I dated Jason several times a week for over 6 months? The trouble was, I didn't know what Dave knew. He had recorded conversations, revealing the night he found us wasn't the first or only night. But what else did he know? Hiding the recorder where I usually did with Jason hinted at suspicion at least one more time. I just didn't know. However, I knew that if I was caught telling one more lie, it would all be over. Well, Juliana, it's time to be vague, avoid details, and stick to the facts. The truth is that Jason did seduce me, and it took a while. He has a thing for older women. It's true that being pursued by a man almost my kid's age gave me an ego boost. I admit it, I was weak. I thought about saying I used the master bed only once, the first time. It would be a lie, but put me in a better light. But not knowing how long Dave knew about my extramarital activities held me back. I decided to stay silent on this. However, I couldn't remain silent on everything, realizing I had limited time to rectify the situation. Unsure of the best course of action, I turned my attention to my notes. I discarded the initial points after being exposed and focused on words highlighted in capital letters. I conveyed that I never ceased to love and respect Dave, emphasizing that I gave him no less love than I always had. I explained that Jason was an additional dimension that didn't diminish anything from my love for Dave, but rather added an overflowing quality, if I could describe it that way. When I fell silent, Dave redirected his gaze to his laptop screen, furrowed his brow, and appeared momentarily confused. However, he eventually relaxed again. Listening to the recording, a continuation of the earlier soundtrack, I understood that Dave's frown indicated he was searching for an icon on the screen before realizing it was one of the open files. It would be better if he didn't grasp it, and he evidently started over. Going back to the beginning of the video, I revisited Jason's question about being closeness in our marital bed. Like the first time, I cringed, knowing my words once again condemned me with, "I already told you, never again, not after the last time." That night, Dave stepped out of the shower and inadvertently stepped on a large drop of white, for which I was grateful. Dave accepted my explanation about sneezing, attributing the drop to snot. Sinking lower into the seat, I anticipated the predictable words that would follow. Although I initially felt smug when I uttered them, that feeling dissipated. Distracting Dave by offering to clean his leg and doing it nicely diverted his attention. Commenting, "You have to admit, doll, that your husband sometimes acts like an ignorant idiot," I found discussing how we successfully evaded detection, such as when he had to hide in the closet when Dave came home early, insulting. Yes, Dave is clueless. Initially, I found it sweet that he trusted me so much. Now, he's just an ignorant fool. Sometimes, I wonder if we could have time in bed right here while he's in the room. The mocking tone made me realize I was rehashing a futile point. With these words and such a tone, I couldn't even convince myself I loved and respected my husband, let alone him. Again, confusion set in. Before this meeting, I convinced myself I loved and respected Dave. But after what I did and said, how was that possible? Steeped in the ticking, tense silence. After the final nail in my coffin, Dave turned to look at me. I couldn't look him in the face, so I turned to his lawyer. Such contempt on her face made me shudder. Any doubts that Dave was just another client to her vanished. I looked away from her and now looked at my lawyer. She, too, wasn't quick enough to hide her disdain. Here I am, fighting for my future, surrounded by people who think I'm something they stepped into at the dog park, and one of them should be on my side. My confidence dissipated like dew in the midday sun, and my self-esteem quickly followed suit. Perhaps that's why I revisited my notes and chose to adopt